Saltburn for like a week was all anyone talked about. I don't remember what they were saying because I don't pay attention and have the memory of a goldfish with Alzheimer's.
Is that you, Angela?
But I remember they talk. Finally, I'm getting around to watching it. I will say I am not going into this completely blind. I saw some critique of the movie and it was compared to Parasite, the Korean film, which is an insanely good movie. It wouldn't be a stretch to call it one of my favorite movies, so I am curious about the film. Though I will admit that the comparison to Parasite wasn't in the least bit positive, though I will try to remain as impartial as possible. So the movie starts off with the main character talking to someone, the audience or maybe a therapist, about Felix, in past tense to show that he is talking to us about the past, of course. He goes on to talk about how everyone adores Felix and wants to be around him, and it's obvious that the main character feels an obsession towards Felix. You can tell because they are showing what I can only assume are clips from later in the movie, and it leaves the question in the air whether the main character is in love with Felix, and then immediately shows a scene of the main character licking what I will pray is icing for cinnamon rolls off the floor. I think this is a good opening scene, but it feels a bit like a movie trailer that gives too much away, though I will admit it's pretty epic with the choir and orchestral music playing. Obviously you guys can't hear it, but you gotta kind of take my word for it, it's pretty epic. When I was younger, I used to think the English accent was so enchanting and dignified until I actually went to the UK, and now it just sounds, it sounds to me. I'm so unimpressed with English accents now, I'm not even going to dignify them with making a joke at their expense. In fact, we're just going to sit here in silence for a moment.
Hey, bruv. Please don't on about healthcare and school shootings like you stupid Americans. Quite sad of that.
Exactly, that's how I feel about the English accent. Anyway, the movie starts with the main character walking onto the campus of his new university, and he obviously sticks out like a sore thumb because this university is full of the most mid-20s looking college students I have ever seen, and he looks like an undercover cop. The movie really goes on to drill into you early that the main character is an outcast. He obviously doesn't belong with the cool and interesting, but he meets the most aggressively played neurodivergent kid I have ever seen.
It's not like I don't believe you.
Please, come on. No, I believe.
Fucking ask me something!
And they use that to show that he doesn't fit in with the weirdos, of course, either. I'm not sure if it's because I'm not paying attention or not, but I finally know the main character's real name, and it's Oliver. They show him interacting with one of the more charming popular students during a orientation or something, and he's reading an essay, and he gets into it with the popular student for criticizing his essay, which immediately makes me on the popular kid's side.
Kind of verbose, don't you think?
No, not really.
No. No, you don't. You used it 7 times.
I've by no stretch of the imagination been a popular student, but I always detested people who feel the need to prove their intelligence. It gives such an impression of insecurity, which I think is kind of the point. Oliver is a socially awkward social outcast who feels the need to weaponize his intelligence as justification for his lack of charisma, and people like that I find boring. They think that people who are charming can't be intelligent as them, but this isn't a video game.
Charisma. What is it made of?
You don't put points into certain things and that's it. People don't have to choose between being intelligent or charismatic.
You alright?
He's done it. He's finally done it. Oliver has finally made contact/introductions with Felix. And I know it's still very early on, but I think I will make my first Parasite comparison. And I will admit I could be wrong, but Saltburn has so far done nothing to make me sympathize with Oliver. The movie has so far made him to be someone who feels a deep, insecure jealousy. I assume as the movie progresses, Oliver will become more and more ingratiated into Felix's life, just like what happened in Parasite, hence the comparison. But it's not doing a great job so far. I don't want Oliver to succeed. He isn't likable, and maybe that's the point. In Parasite, there are no heroes. Everyone is awful, terrible, selfish human beings, but it does a fantastic job of making you sympathize with the poor family and their struggle early on, even as they become worse and worse people. And even as things become the worst, at least for me, I never once feel bad for the rich family because they've done nothing to garner that sympathy. It's still very early on in Saltburn, but I feel nothing for Oliver but disdain, really. And while I don't like Felix because of the archetypical trope he portrays, it isn't his fault he is popular any more than it is Oliver's fault for being awkward.
I'm sorry I don't know your name. I'm Felix.
Oliver.
Oliver?
Yeah.
Oliver.
I would go so far as to say Oliver is more at fault because he could actively work on changing for the better, but decides to introduce himself by being almost subservient to Felix. This movie really wants to drill home that Oliver doesn't just want to be Felix, he wants to be with Felix. I don't believe by any stretch of the imagination that Oliver is meant to be likable in any genuine way, and that's absolutely fine. But I'm less than 15 minutes into the movie and he already ditches the nerd guy who he hangs out with, who albeit isn't that great either, but kind of a shitbag move in my opinion. Oliver is pressured into buying a round he can't afford, and as he is literally begging the bartender to let him come back another time to pay, Felix comes and literally just pays for the round, which I assume this scene is meant to really establish their characters. Oliver, a nobody who desperately wishes to be someone he sees as having worth, value, and a social life, and Felix, someone with all those things. And if the themes I'm picking up on mean anything, Felix has something Oliver doesn't: compassion. I wouldn't be surprised if Oliver turns out to be a sociopath by the end of the movie.
He'll get bored of you.
The blonde nerd confronts Oliver and calls him a bootlicker, and that Felix will eventually get bored of Oliver, which maybe I try to see too much of the good in people, but I don't see why Felix would. He so far has been portrayed as someone compassionate and open-minded. Just then, Oliver overhears Felix talking to one of his friends about how no one in Felix's circle wants to be caught next to Oliver because he's awkward and poor, which, one, fuck you. Two, ouch. Anyway, Oliver handles this by standing outside of Felix's bedroom, blasting lung darts while he has sex. This scene, I believe, is meant to show Oliver's transformation, or the real beginning of it. Before, there were slight things like Oliver changing how he dressed, or originally declining a cigarette, eventually giving it a shot, to straight up standing outside of Felix's room chain smoking. This scene, in my opinion, isn't just meant to show the previously awkward and shy Oliver as something or someone different than he was at the beginning of the movie. It is meant to give the impression that this is his first dip into a decline in which he becomes something deranged. This movie obviously isn't meant to be funny, but something I found funny is a scene that happens later. Oliver and Felix get into an argument. Oliver gets anxious and sees Felix later that day at the pub on a date, and the part I found funny comes next when Oliver sees Annabelle waiting for Felix back when he gets to the dorms. Her and Oliver lament how Felix is a big stinky doo-doo head, and they decide to hook up. And as they're making out, she says to Oliver, "Do you think Felix will get jealous?" And Oliver says it probably won't even register to him, and she gets upset and leaves. But Oliver is right, it won't register to him. Why would he care or it matter? This is the same person telling Felix earlier how no one likes Oliver because he's awkward and poor. Logically, why would you hooking up with the awkward poor kid matter to anyone? But I found it funny because she obviously is trying to use Oliver as a way to hurt Felix, as she needs to drink to even kiss him. But it's funny because what did you expect from the awkward guy? When you ask a dumb question like that, he'll finally have social awareness. I think it's silly how everyone treats those around them as disposable, but doesn't want to be disposed of. Annabelle immediately went with Felix and left the guy she was talking with at the party earlier, which, for clarification, she doesn't owe that guy anything just because he talked to her. Oliver threw away Michael at the first chance he got. So far, the people in Felix's orbit all want to be special to him, but they're all shallow and have nothing special about them, other than wanting to be special to Felix. So, after failing to hook up, Oliver gets a call from his mom that his dad is dead. Some accident, and he immediately goes to Felix for sympathy and comfort, and Felix suggests he go home and possibly miss the exams. The reason I bring this up is because there's a nagging feeling that it's bullshit, or that there's more to it. I'm not sure, but my spider sense is tingling that Oliver is lying or not telling a whole truth. I understand wanting comfort during a rough time, but I don't know. It's odd that he mentions he isn't very close with his family, and sure, that makes sense. Why go to the funeral of a father you weren't close with? But I find it strange that he is distraught enough over his father to seek Felix out for comfort, but not enough to go to his funeral. Okay, so I won't spend every moment documenting every single thought I have during a movie, but I will say two things. It has taken me 2 weeks to finish this movie, and in that time, it has been slightly spoiled in that someone mentioned that Oliver may be a bad person.
Move this man!
so unfortunately spoiled. But I will make this video still and give thoughts and review it properly as best as I can. I just thought I'd mention that, but in all fairness, I already got the impression that Oliver is not who he appears to be by how everything he does seems to be a part of a plan, and everything he does seems to be him taking the next step in something greater. It's all super shady, especially in the scene soon after Oliver finds out his father died, and him and Felix are sharing a moment in which Felix shares a tradition he has in his family of writing their dead relatives' names on stone, then chuck them in a river to memorialize them. And as they are taking a moment of silence, Felix closes his eyes and once again shows that he is someone who ultimately is capable of empathy and compassion, though he is kind of a bro. Oliver just takes a moment to look at Felix, as though to say, this isn't about my father, this is so I can get closer to you. Yo, this motherfucker live in a goddamn castle. Jesus Christ. I figured he was rich because they mentioned some author wrote stories inspired by Felix's family, and if someone is writing stories about your family, you know that's some old fucking money. Actually, it kind of reminds me of Princess Diana's childhood home, which I just found out in my 20s that she wasn't like a poor commoner, which was how media portrayed her, as like, OMG, a lowly commoner. And turns out this bitch was loaded out the wazoo. Like, this is her childhood home, like this one right here. You would have thought the way that they portray her as like a common man's princess, she grew up next to a trap house. Anyway, Felix got that princess die before she was a princess type money. Yo, they got butler money. Are butlers still a thing? I've been around some pretty rich people in my life, but I've never actually met someone with a butler. Housekeepers? For sure. Easy. I know people with housekeeper money, but butler money? Crazy. Anyway, after getting settled, Felix tells Oliver that they will all be in the library hanging out. Two things I want to point out. This movie is really laying it on thick, just the divide between Felix and Oliver. They do two things to suggest this. One, Felix asks Oliver to shave because his mom has a thing about beards. Okay, weird, but whatever. You see that Oliver cut himself shaving to suggest that this is a new experience for him. As he is looking around in bewilderment at Felix's home, you see who I assume is Felix's mother talking about Oliver and how troubled his life is. But the part that they lay on thick to show a divide is that this woman thinks there are no rehabs in Liverpool.
I mean, they probably don't have rehab in Liverpool.
Now, I don't know a lot about geography, but I do know from a goddamn Google search that Liverpool has a population of almost 500,000 people. There's disconnected and then there's just stupid. I don't know, maybe she is stupid. It's still very early in the movie because they don't even know where Liverpool is. I mean, neither do I. But I think maybe they're laying it on a little thick.
Not attractive, and his parents are drug addicts.
Also, these catty bitches pretend like they weren't gossiping about Oliver loud as fuck, like he could hear them from the hallway. Because as soon as he enters the room, they're like, hush. Oh no, hey, how are you? But I'm pretty sure this is meant to establish that at least the mother is not necessarily two-faced, but cares deeply for appearances. Because as soon as the friend she was gossiping about Oliver with leaves,
Poor dear Pamela. She's been staying with us while she gets back on her feet. She's had an awful time this year.
she begins to tell Oliver how she is living with them because she's in a rough patch in her life and on drugs and dating some ugly Russian billionaire. I think this, in a way, is meant to establish or emphasize the inherent contradiction of polite society, or how it isn't really a thing, because it's awful to talk shit about someone to their face, but it's free game when they're not around. That's something I never understood, because I'm more than happy to talk about my horrible life to anyone who shows an interest. Just ask me. So they're at dinner and they're all gussied up, and this is likely to show even greater the divide between Felix's lifestyle and a regular person. Like, these human beings look like they're going to the Oscars just to eat the middest food ever. I don't know if they'll say what food they're eating, but I know it's the opposite of good. It's probably like beans on toast or whatever the rich version of that is. Anyway, they do more polite society shit where they pretend they want Pamela to stay to be polite, but they actually very obviously want her to leave. They found out she's moving because Farley asks in a snide and impolite way, how long is she going to be staying?
About it, Pamela, darling. You know we're delighted to have you for however long it is you mean to stay.
Forever?
And so far, that's essentially his character. To say things that people in this polite society are thinking but don't want to say. He is almost in a way a representation of their inner thoughts. He is essentially the antithesis to Felix. Farley is obnoxious, pompous, rude, and just overall a spoiled brat. While that isn't to say Felix has no flaws, he is a bit of an airhead womanizer who seems to have no interest in anything not in his periphery, and yet none of that is inherently his fault. It is not Felix's fault he's good looking, nor come from a wealthy family, and is kind of a bro. I mean, the bro thing he can help for sure, but actually, I just had a thought. Felix is almost, in a way, meaningless, and what I mean by that is that things happen around him, not to him so far in the movie. He is almost, in a way, a side character or a plot device, simply there to move the plot along in some way. Almost like just a prize or a goal for Oliver to reach, nothing more. Anyway, I went on a bit of a tangent, but I'm essentially saying Felix is, for the most part, just a dude who comes from a wealthy family, and he doesn't make it his personality, whereas, ironically enough, Farley, who is Felix's cousin, side of the family no longer has any money, so much so that Felix's father pays for his schooling. So why is Farley the obnoxious rich kid, and Felix isn't? Felix can't help who he is, but Farley has no reason to be who he is. One thing I think they're really trying to stress is just how eccentric Felix's family is, and how they convey this with little things throughout the movie, like Felix's sister having a free spirit, cheerily talking how the moon is full soon and they would lose their minds, and the next morning at breakfast, Oliver asks for a full English breakfast, and there's a weird uncomfortable pause before someone explains to him that everything for breakfast is off to the side, and that the only thing made personal for each person are their eggs.
Not the eggs. The eggs are made for you.
And they really insist that the eggs are made for each person. And maybe that will have some importance or relevance later in the movie, but I do find myself thinking, I wish they were a bit more subtle with what they're trying to convey. I want to watch the movie and have to pause and think about what I just saw, but this movie is kind of force-feeding me a bit. I'm not sure if that makes any sense though. This is really more of a personal problem than anything else with the movie, but I really hate English accents. I find myself rewinding the movie several times just to take in or understand what they're saying. It's like when they talk, my eyes gloss over and it all sounds like someone trying to speak with pudding in their mouth. After that awkward ass breakfast, Felix, his sister, and Farley decide to loosen up by sitting bucket ass naked in a field, and Oliver decides to tag along. I don't really have anything to say about this scene, it just kind of feels unnecessary. Like, it's probably for shock value, but it's almost like a jump scare, but not even a well-timed one. It doesn't last very long, and there isn't much dialogue beyond Farley commenting that Oliver has a big penis. Beyond Farley's motif being he's a bitchy gay, another consistent one is that he doesn't like Oliver, and on the surface it's because Oliver is poor and not supposed to be here over and over. They hint that underlying reason is that Farley sees something everyone else doesn't, and I could be reading too deeply into it and this red door could just be a red door, but it feels like there's something about Oliver that has his sassy gay senses tingling. An instance of this kind of force-fed to the viewer that during a scene in which the entire family is watching a horror movie, which I believe is Ringu, which I need to watch, whatever. There's a scene in which everyone in the family recoils in fear and disgust except Oliver, who is smiling and laughing, and Farley notices this. And you could possibly argue that Oliver is smiling at how dramatic everyone is being, but this movie doesn't do subtlety. During a montage, which I feel like this movie has quite a few of, maybe I'm imagining things, but during the montage of Oliver spending time with Felix's family, there's some bougie rich person pottery that Farley notices and calls ugly that Oliver comments on and sounds knowledgeable about. The big thing about this is the next scene you see Oliver looking at what appears to be a textbook on Saltburn and studying on the very same pots, which there's nothing inherently wrong with this. Who hasn't done some research or quickly googled something to sound smarter and more knowledgeable around people you want to impress? But this, I feel, is meant to show that Oliver can be sneaky in a lot of ways, which gets me to my larger point of it not being necessary. I feel like once again the movie lays on something real thick and feeds you something even past the point of needing anymore. So this is the first time during this movie I had to pause and just be like, hey yo, what the fuck? Oliver catches Felix shaking hands with the milkman, if you catch my drift. You know, having a boxing match with the one-eyed champ. He's showing the conductor his one-way ticket to hell, as a Catholic nun would say. So while Felix is straight punishing his meat, I guess he forgot to close both doors to his shared bathroom, which, okay, whatever, but punching in the clock while in a bathtub can't be very comfortable. Anyway, Oliver catches Felix and begins to examine his body in a very similar way that I look at a rotisserie chicken. But that's not the part that made me pause, because who hasn't caught their homeboy playing the 5-knuckle shuffle and took a moment to enjoy just how immaculate he looks? That's just bros being bros. The part that made me pause, where I had to verbally say no homo, is when Oliver commits a party foul. As a tub full of Felix's baby gravy goes down the drain, Oliver says, waste not, want not, and decides to get him a sip. And honestly, the sheer joy in that man's face can only be described as mwah. Compliments to the chef. I want to find someone who looks at me the way Oliver looks at bath water with a little crotch custard in it. You know, as I think about it, that bath water is probably the most seasoned English meal Oliver's ever had in his life. I can't think of any more jokes, so I'm just going to leave you with this. I don't have any commentary on this scene, to be honest, but something that was said will forever be seared into my mind. While waiting for everyone to arrive for dinner, Felix's mother is gossiping with Oliver about Venetia, I think that's how you say it, who is Felix's sister, whose name I just now learned because I had to go to the IMDb website and go, who the fuck is that? Anyway, they're talking about how Felix's mom used to be a lesbian, but the sex was too good, so she switched back to men because it's drier. And you know what? If you like making campfires, go for it. Anyway, they're gossiping about V, and she's talking about how she thought she would grow out of her having fingers for pudding. And I've never heard someone be so casual about their child with an eating disorder before. Like, it was almost funny when I heard it, because I was like, huh?
Because you're so fucking beautiful.
Anyway, then Oliver shoots a shot Stacy's mom style and calls Stifler's mom hot, like he didn't have a midnight snack of custard soup the other night. Something else happens during this scene that is mildly interesting in my opinion, is that Oliver brings up Pamela and Felix's mother comments that she's finally gone, and Oliver proceeds to talk about how Pamela's stories seem made up, to Felix's mother's relief. The reason I bring this up is we are reaching a halfway point in the film, and they're obviously trying to ramp up Oliver and how manipulative he is by having him slowly get closer and closer to Felix's family. Oliver then dips his finger in V's porridge bowl and does a tumbler daddy doll move and commands her to eat dinner tomorrow, and she agrees or she will be punished like a naughty girl she is. This scene threw me off, one, because V tells him it's her time of the month and he proceeds to say, I'm a vampire, diddle her fiddle, then lick his fingers. Like, okay, whatever, no shame, but this is such an odd scene because it takes the slow build-up of Oliver changing and ramps it up to 100 at the drop of a hat. It happens so fast you get whiplash. Like, obviously Oliver isn't who he is portraying himself to be, but for someone who at the beginning of their time at Saltburn seemingly couldn't muster the courage to say more than one word or two, or barely even look anyone in the eye for that matter when they talk, to then become, you've been naughty, haven't you? Bad girl, you're gonna stop having an eating disorder. You're gonna eat all your jacket potatoes and beans like a good girl. That switch up is jarring, but it should be jarring for V. At no point has this man shown that level of audacity or confidence, and now he has shown almost zero interest in you, but now he's throwing up ninja hand signs in your English muffin, and you don't find that wild? Bro didn't even ask consent. I don't know, should have been a red flag, I think. So Farley sees this and tells Felix, and Felix gets upset at Oliver, which I mean, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, maybe I could understand being upset that your friend hooked up with your sister. Like, don't cross the family boundary. But Felix genuinely seems more upset that it was Oliver. And once confronted, Oliver lies and says she came on to him, and Felix believes him, even though he literally watched them shoot flirty glances at each other. Does this look like the face of a guy who regrets it, let alone only did it to not embarrass V? Come on. Oliver so far throughout the movie has done nothing to make them not trust him, or not take things he says at face value, but he also hasn't done anything to earn their trust beyond the surface level. It's not like you've been friends for years and there's a foundation built. Like, I'm not saying keep your guard up and don't trust anyone, but if a red flag pops up this early in any type of relationship, then be incredibly vigilant, because even if what Oliver is lying about is true, is he not adult enough to say no, or say, hey, thank you, but you're my friend's sister and it would be disrespectful and shitty of me to do anything with you. But also, this is something very easily verifiable. Just ask V. Like, why would V and Farley lie about this specifically if there have been zero hiccups so far? So Farley and Felix get into an argument because Farley thinks it's messed up that Felix's family is willing to throw Oliver an extravagant party while Farley's mother barely scrapes by. And then Farley says something about footmen, which I thought he meant like Quentin Tarantino, but it apparently means black people, which if it doesn't, don't correct me. I refuse to learn British slang. Anyway, Farley tries to pull a race card, but it's only half of one, which easily activates Felix's trap card where he says, And it does crit damage because Felix walks away saying, maybe my family has done enough for you, and everyone feels worse off. Jokes aside, this is obviously an attempt to give Farley's character more depth, I think, than just being a sassy gay, and I think for me personally it doesn't do a great job because it adds nothing to his character. Farley has demonstrated the entire movie so far that he is a typical spoiled rich brat. It's mentioned that he was kicked out of several other schools for sleeping with staff, which is fucked up for a plethora of other reasons, but most importantly is the crux of his entire character. Someone who has been lucky to be given a chance of a lifetime only to not be serious about it. He goes to a prestigious school for free where more likely than not he will be casually waving at future politicians, CEOs, and other future massively influential members of British society. If Farley cared at all for his mother and her circumstances, he would work harder than anyone else in the room. And of course that doesn't mean Farley should be a stick in the mud, but he should recognize that he is indeed fortunate. So for him to pull the race card in order to get money from his family feels gross, because there's black kids who would do unspeakable things just to be able to live in a mansion, let alone go to school for free on top of it. Speaking of Farley, Oliver throws out a curveball and says Oliver and Farley should have sex, and it makes Farley turn to mush, which is wild because at no point has Farley shown anything but contempt for Oliver. But as soon as Oliver offers to let Farley water the devil's garden, Farley loses all that contempt. Oh, never mind. Farley is still a sassy bitch at heart and sets Oliver up during karaoke and makes him sing a song that embarrasses him in front of everyone, which before, when I thought Farley was ready to caress Oliver's peace pipe, I thought, feels weird and stereotypical that they are portraying the sassy gay as willing to hook up with a guy the first chance they get, and how harmful that is. Then he pulls this stunt and I'm immediately like, okay, it's pretty on brand for a sassy bougie gay to go too far. This movie throws so many scenes at you right after the other that it's not pleasant, because you don't have time to sit with anything, because right after the karaoke thing, Oliver angrily punches a mirror, which I'm curious how he will explain, and then he tries to Mr. Gray Farley by giving an angry dry handy, which I guess works because Farley folds like fresh linen. This is just a thought I had, and I think this gives a bit of credence to my belief that Oliver is in fact a sociopath. There was an instance earlier in the movie, I believe it was during the time they're trying to kick Pamela out without kicking her out, I guess, where it seems that Oliver feels a genuine sense of empathy towards Pamela, how a kindred spirit in some way, or Pamela reminds him of his family or something. I think this theory is strengthened later, where for a moment when Oliver finds out she's dead, he seems genuinely struck by it, as though almost pained. There might be other instances where Oliver shows genuine emotion, sure, but I think this might be one of the only times he shows maybe even actual empathy. Unironically, the most interesting part of the movie that has had me actually captivated was the scene the day of Oliver's birthday where Felix out of nowhere takes Oliver home, and Felix finds out that Oliver has been lying the entire time, which isn't a shock to anyone who has paid attention to the movie. Of course there's something off and wrong with Oliver, but what makes this scene interesting in my opinion is that I wasn't expecting Felix to find out that Oliver is a liar until it was too late.
Oh, I bet, yeah, I bet.
And though I know that Oliver ultimately fucks everyone over somehow, now I'm interested because I am curious to see how he does this exactly. Now that there is no more trust amongst them, how will Oliver ultimately come out on top?
Let me just explain.
I think the best thing is that you go home after your party.
And Farley goes on a coke-fueled rant about how Oliver will need to try much harder to get rid of him, and ultimately this lavish lifestyle that Oliver has had for a summer, he will remember fondly for the rest of his life as he reminisces about it with his kids. And Farley, well, it will always be his life, no matter how bad Oliver wants it. And oh, ouchie, but what really twists the knife made of lemons in Oliver's wound is that during his happy birthday song, no one remembers or even says his name. Adding fuel to the fire that Oliver is a nobody, essentially. But to my earlier point, who cares? Oliver comes from a middle-class home with a seemingly nice family. His life is mundane and boring, and that's fine. But what's the point? What is the movie trying to say? Maybe it's not saying anything, and this is all just a fun drama, but it feels empty in a way. Not to bring up Parasite again, but it does its best to show you that, sure, while the poor family ultimately their downfall was due to their hubris, their struggle is inherently righteous. They are quite literally at the bottom of society. They are suffering. Their home floods, dirt and debris come through their only available window out into the world. They live on top of each other and scrape by on pennies. Their suffering is palpable. And the rich family, they aren't even able to see poor people as human. Everyone is beneath them. They don't even see others outside of their class. So when the poor family takes as much as they can, even when they got greedy, I was still on their side. It wasn't until they got cocky that I started to be annoyed at their actions, but I still understood them. This is to say, I don't understand Oliver's motivations. I don't like Felix's family, sure, but I don't hate them. In fact, the movie has spent most of the time humanizing Felix. I don't care if Felix wins, but I have no interest in seeing him lose either. Oliver just wants to be someone. Yeah, so does everyone else. At least his starting position in life was drastically better than someone living in council housing, for example. I'm rambling, but, like, what's the message here? Middle-class white guys from the suburbs have tough lives? Excessive wealth makes you do weird shit and become jaded? I don't know. I'm not sure what's happening. Felix is taking a girl off into his family's hedge maze to hook up, which is inherently confusing because you have a room there at your house. In fact, you can use any number of rooms on the property, and Oliver follows him. To be honest, I don't really see this going anywhere besides Oliver killing Felix somehow. Alright, well, Felix isn't dead. They have what is meant to be this emotional confrontation of like, Felix, I love you, man. My lying, it was for you. Everyone wants to be around you and near you, so I performed. And Felix is like, man, I feel nothing for you. And heartfelt music plays and I don't feel anything, to be honest. This scene is meant to have this like profound emotional impact on the viewer, but like honestly, I don't feel anything. I guess it doesn't feel earned, I guess. I don't know. Oliver, before walking off, says, I don't care what you think anymore. And I wouldn't be surprised if that last interaction is the one before Oliver truly snaps. His last-ditch effort to save not only the life he wants, but to save Felix from what is to come. Oops, never mind, I called it. Felix is dead. Don't know how though, but I called it. I will say that the scene of them at lunch after finding Felix's body is probably the second best, if not actually the best scene, and feels genuinely compelling. Everyone's sitting, trying to go about their lives like everything is normal, as though their brother, son, and cousin isn't being wheeled away in a body bag not 30 feet away. And everyone is doing their best to keep it together, and they're doing a piss poor job at it, of course. And it's unironically the most human that they've been so far. These people who are so wealthy, they're out of touch, and almost divine have been made human. So Farley is kicked out of the house because he does coke, which is like, okay, I guess. It's brought to everyone's attention because Farley, to a certain degree, rightfully asks, hey, what are you still doing here, Oliver? And Oliver is like, Farley does booger sugar, everybody. Which you could argue he was on thin ice and that was a final straw, I guess. But like, I don't know. Their desire to keep things as seemingly normal as possible in their minds is kinda odd, but it fits within their character, so fuck it. Yo, this motherfucker is trying to fuck Felix's dead body. Holy shit. I thought for a moment he was just emotional and overwhelmed and unable to process his emotions, and for a moment, as he was taking off his shirt, in my mind, jokingly, I was like, is he gonna fuck the ground? And then I'm like, no, of course not. No, that would be weird. He starts sobbing harder, and then I see him finger popping the ground, like with like actual pretty good technique. Like it's decent, you know. It's not gonna win any awards, but whatever. And I'm like, yo! And then I notice he's kissing the ground. Like, yo, what? This is purely for shock value, of course, but unironically, one of the better scenes is Oliver has always been obsessed with Felix. He was everything he wanted to be, sure, but he also wanted to be with Felix, and now he can never have him. So in his depravity, what is left but to try and send him off, right? I guess? Okay, he didn't have to pull out his hog. We got the message. I take back what I said. Jesus, Oliver, get it together. Then V goes on this big monologue about why is Oliver sobbing for someone he knew 6 months? Which is a dumbass point. I could be friends with someone a month. If we were close enough that I met their family and we were friends, then I would still be upset at their death. Anyway, V goes on and on about how Oliver is pathetic and a nobody and wishes he could have this life, which, now that I'm near the end of the movie, what gives you that impression? Oliver hasn't done or really said anything that affirm hers or Farley's assumption at all. He is weird and sneaky, but the viewer knows that, not V. But blah blah blah, Oliver says she ended her life because she can't live without Felix, which I don't really believe, but there isn't enough time for them to weave a good narrative reason why everyone is out of the picture for Oliver to get everything in the end. So we're going to kind of roll with this one. So the end of the movie is basically how Oliver did it. Poisoning Felix, flattening Felix's tire in the beginning, putting blades near V, etc. This is all after he was paid by James to leave Saltburn. Anyway, Felix's mother runs into Oliver in a coffee shop and invites him back to Saltburn. And I think he slowly poisons her and then pulls her off of life support. Which, for a moment, what? Sure, we can say, hey, maybe he used a poison you can't find in an autopsy to poison Felix. But it makes no sense why I wouldn't be suspicious for her breathing tube to be ripped out. Her to suddenly fall ill when Oliver is back in the picture. The same person who was in the picture when all of her children died. But also, why would she leave everything to Oliver? Hell, why not Farley? He isn't dead. He is at least a relative. Why is none of that suspicious to anyone? It's just kind of odd. Final thoughts. It was a mid-movie. It's one of those movies you put on while you're on a date to watch because you heard about it, but you get like 30 minutes in before you start making out. It's pretty predictable, and I think it uses a lot of scenes that are meant to shock you to not seem predictable, but don't add anything of actual substance to the movie. You honestly, in fact, become numb to it by the end of the movie, from Oliver having sex with the grave to him dancing butt naked and doing lines in Saltburn at the end. It doesn't give you time to sit with anything and actually absorb it. It's just one back-to-back scene of what left field scene can we put in after another. Like, who was genuinely shocked at the end of the movie? Even if the movie wasn't spoiled for me, the movie narratively could only go one way, and they either didn't have time or left it up to the viewer to fill in the gaps on how it got there. Sure, Oliver won, and the big reveal is that the person from the beginning he is retelling everything to is Felix's dying mother, but it doesn't leave you feeling fulfilled. Like, I have no problem with a bad guy or anti-hero or what have you winning. Felix's family weren't great people. Felix himself was just barely a decent one. But I feel nothing that Oliver got Saltburn in the end. He didn't earn Saltburn by outsmarting everyone. Everything that happened went his way through either luck or the power of plot. The movie doesn't narratively build him up to be any smarter than everyone else, just someone who's incredibly unassuming. Saltburn wasn't a hard-fought prize in the end. Oliver is just a psychopath who, through the power of plot, didn't get caught. Because every part of Oliver's master plan has to have the viewer fill in the blanks when put up with any scrutiny. Poison not showing up in an autopsy report, James dying within a few-year time frame, no one being suspicious of Felix's mother getting violently ill when Oliver returns and leaves Farley with nothing, Felix not just walking or running to his class. Oliver taking over Saltburn wasn't some grand master plan that was calculated and came together perfectly. He's unassuming and white, and people felt that because one or both of those facts, they were safe around him. He got lucky because it moved the plot along. Kinda boring, honestly. No wonder it took me forever to finish. I'm honestly kinda glad it's over. Honestly, I would suggest just going to go watch Parasite. It's a much better movie.